Okay, good afternoon everyone. Hi, and welcome to this very special session here at Interchange today. My name is Nick Reed and my company is Reed Mobility, where I work on transport technology and safety. For 3 years I was Chief Road Safety Advisor to National Highways, helping them develop their Vision Zero strategy. Today we're building on an excellent session that was held at a Highways conference last year on suicide prevention. And we thought that Interchange was the perfect way to build on that, looking at intermodal, cross-modal learning in prevention of suicide risk. And we're very grateful to the organisers for including us on the agenda. Sadly, suicide is on the rise, and this is, of course, tragic for the individuals affected, but also their family and friends, first responders, and indeed anyone who observes such an incident. The government's previous prevention strategy was launched in 2023, and called for a multi-agency approach, and the Samaritans has been working across sectors, including the road and rail industries, for many years. Our session will cover how these industries can make a difference in reducing suicides. Just before we begin the discussion, a couple of housekeeping notes. So firstly, we're going to be discussing a sensitive subject, so we're going to do our best to use the right language and suitable level of detail. But if anyone feels at any time they need to take a break, just step out, no judgment, no questions asked. Support is available through the Samaritans and through employee assistance programs as needed. And because of the sensitivity of the topic, we're not going to do a Q&A at the end of the session, but we'd welcome the opportunity to continue discussions at the National Highway stand in the main hall later at the end of the session. So we're here to recognise the scale of the challenge, to encourage your curiosity and to reinforce that together we can make a difference. Right, on with the discussions, and I'd like to introduce our great panel. First, we have Louise McNally from Network Rail, who is the Suicide and Trespass Prevention Lead. We have Beth Pettersen from Samaritans, who is Non-Rail High-Risk Location Programme Manager. And we have Nikki from National Highways, who's the Principal Advisor on Suicide Prevention, and Kate Carpenter, Senior Associate Director at Jacobs and Lead on Operational Road Safety. So yeah, great panel, very well qualified to talk about the subject. So the first question, and that's to you, Beth. I mean, it's really, what is the shape, the size, the scale of the problem we're facing in terms of suicide prevention nationally, and then within transport specifically?
Yeah, so over 6,000 people die by suicide in the UK every year, which equates to around one person every 90 minutes taking their own life. As Nick, you've mentioned, we're looking across kind of wider statistics, looking at kind of wider trends. We have seen a rise in the number of suicides, and we are now at the highest level that we've had in around 25 years. So we know that suicide and suicidal behaviour is really complex, and it's not kind of one event or factor that might bring somebody to be suicidal. And it's often a combination of lots of different factors. So that could be, say, mental health, history of abuse, occupation. It could be deprivation, etc., etc. I've only named a few of them, which kind of interact with one another to kind of increase risk. We do know that middle-aged men continue to be at highest risk of suicide, with nearly 3/4 of individuals who have died by suicide being male and 1/4 female. Around 1/3 of the registered suicides take place outside of the home, so in public spaces. They are perceived by people in crisis to have relatively minimal harm on friends and family because they are outside of the home, but fundamentally we know that it does impact kind of bystanders, witnesses, drivers, etc. We know that there is an estimated 135 people who are impacted by each suicide. So if you tally that across, it's over 800,000 people a year. So it's a really huge number of people who are impacted each year. But suicide is preventable. And in the case of registered suicides that happen outside of the home, it may present more of an opportunity to be able to intervene with that person through various means that I think we're going to talk through today. And I think fundamentally we all have a part to play, which is why it's great to be on the panel today and great to have you guys as part of this.
Thanks, Beth. It was amazing statistics. That 135 figure is really jarring, isn't it? And I think it's underappreciated, Nikki, like the extent to which that the transport network is a vector, is the approach that people are taking to attempt their lives. So yeah, how does it play out for national highways?
So for us, suicides play a significant part of the road deaths, but it's not a official sort of reported figure. So we capture this data internally through our post-collision fatal reporting processes. We estimated around 50 suicides per year on the strategic road network, and sadly, in line with Beth's figures, we're seeing that increase. So suicides equating to probably around 20 to 25% of all deaths on our roads. And then to bring that into context as well, you have people who present, we have attempts on top of that, but that's even more difficult to kind of determine due to the data that's available. So we know the issue is really significant for us. So we're doing lots. And again, following through on Beth's point around people impacted. So we now have a process where if people intervene with somebody in crisis on our network, that's reported through our sort of health and safety and well-being reporting processes, including the supply chain. So we can now see the impact it's having on road workers, on our traffic officers, inspectors, operators who view or are responding through CCTV or telephones to people in crisis. So the magnitude and that ripple effect of a single event is quite significant. And we now, we have a vision zero harm on our network for our people, for our customers. And it's, we can't shy away from these incidents if that's what we want to achieve. So as physical as well as psychological harm, that, it's something that we need to invest in.
Yeah, and we'll get into that discussion more as we go through. And yeah, Louise, by the same token, for Network Rail, sorry.
Yeah, so it's also a very significant challenge for us. To put that into context, we have a suicide on the rail infrastructure every 31 hours. So last financial year, we saw 276 suicides across our infrastructure. But over and above the suicides, we also have an increasing number of vulnerable presentations that are taking place. And last year, that number was around 200, was over 2,500. So we have the incidents that result in suicide, but we also have a vast number of incidents that involve people who are very, very vulnerable, and those incidents are often quite drawn out and complex to resolve. Beyond that, we have the impact on our workforce that we need to consider. They are often witnessing things, sometimes on multiple occasions, that people shouldn't really have to see when they go to work every day. So we feel that obviously we have a responsibility to care as much for them as we can. And then, of course, there's the impact on the travelling public. So as these incidents play out, suicide incidents in particular are quite drawn-out incidents. You may have a train that's sort of stuck behind the incident that's happened with full of people, and the train behind that, and the train behind that, and the train behind that. You also have people that are overcrowding on station platforms that occurs. So the delay minutes that these incidents occur, that these incidents are causing, was to the tune of around 900,000 minutes last year, and then the cost implication of that is millions and tens of millions of pounds each year. So significant in size.
Huge issue in both contexts. Yeah. And Kate, I mean, you've got a professional interest in this topic, but also a personal one in terms of your experience of sudden bereavement and support for people who face that. So, yeah, tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so as well as the day job, we're working with design and supply chain partners who are present where incidents happen. As Louise describes, we see that trauma, and I've supported people in a workplace where people have had exposure to that. And also the positive side of things they can do to prevent it. Because I was widowed young, I'm an admin for the Widowed and Young charity, supporting people who've lost a life partner from any cause before their 51st birthday. And we see the enduring nature. Obviously, a lot of those bereavements are from suicide. And seeing the scale of it, and because road death is only about a quarter of the scale of suicide, although my day job obviously impacts on that role and I see that loss, you see the additional challenges that suicide means to the people left behind. Often people feel guilt. They feel they were at fault for either not seeing that somebody was struggling, and often there isn't actually an opportunity for them to have seen it in advance, as well as feeling that they failed the person. So that's that enduring, very long-term nature of both the supply chain trauma and the families, friends and colleagues of those who've died. I've seen that sort of long-term impact, which sort of makes me redouble my efforts to try and do what I can to prevent it.
And on that topic of efforts to prevent it, Louise, tell us what Network Rail have been doing.
So we have a huge amount of work that goes into dealing with trying to prevent suicides and then respond to them when they occur as well. So one of the main tools that we have at our disposal, and one of the tools that is absolutely so important, is the training that Samaritans provide to Network Rail. So Network Rail have been working alongside Samaritans for 15 years now, so we've had a long-standing partnership, and over that time they have trained 31,000 of our rail industry staff to intervene if they see somebody. So it's recognising the signs and then giving our industry workforce the tools and the confidence to intervene if they see somebody who looks like they might be struggling or vulnerable. And as a result of that, we have sort of somewhere between 1,700 and 2,200 life-saving interventions across the rail infrastructure every year. So it's huge. And then on top of that, we have sort of conversations with vulnerable people as well. So the impact of that training is really, really important to us. We launched yesterday, actually, our 8th year of a campaign that we also run alongside Samaritans called Small Talk Saves Lives. And that's about bystanders. So although we train our rail industry staff to intervene, encouraging the general public to do the same thing, to recognise the signs, and make small talk, because it's such a simple thing to do to change somebody's thought process, particularly if they're suicidal, to bring them back into the moment. And you can do that so easily, simply by making small talk, saying to somebody, "Oh, I really like your shoes." The difference that such a simple conversation starter can make is massive. Beyond that, we work closely with the British Transport Police, and they do some amazing things. They have a team called the Harm Reduction Team, and they are their sole purpose is to work with high-frequency presenters. So we have some presenters that will come back time and time again, 60, 70, 80, 90 times, and obviously the impact of those incidents is huge. So they will work with them. They will work on mental health support with them. It could be housing support. It could be drugs and alcohol support. A whole range of issues that they're working to give that person better strategies than consistently coming back to the railway. We have designing out crime units. Again, BTP specialists that work with us to make sure that we are designing our stations and infrastructure to limit access to means, because that's obviously one of the key things that we can be doing. So we have got, and then of course technology. We are looking at how technology can be used, particularly visual surveillance and cameras. But obviously there's all sorts of complexities around that. So that's something that we're exploring at the moment as well.
And what was that figure? Life preventions per day?
Interventions,
yes, sorry.
So we have life-saving interventions, 2,200.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. So, Nikki, what about national highways? That was a great draw through what Network Rail have been doing. What about national highways?
So at national highways, we've been looking at where we've got our highest frequency locations. So locations on our network that are more at risk or have a history of suicide or suicide attempts. And we've been trying to implement that Public Health England guidance around sort of 4 different themes to reduce suicides at the location. So things like improving help-seeking opportunities through the crisis signs, Samaritans crisis signs, or emergency telephones, thinking about how we improve people interventions at those locations, so training our people to recognise and respond to people in crisis. We've been looking at restricting access to means, so quite a number of our locations we've raised the parapets or put in additional planting or barriers or fencing to prevent people from reaching those locations. And then we've also worked with Samaritans on making sure that if we do have a location that's of high risk, that the media is responsibly reporting about events at that location. So, or we don't promote a location through either bridge decorations or things like that, where we have in the past had, people bereaved or good intentions to I suppose, acknowledge that location and their respect, but it can also have consequences for highlighting that place as a means of suicide. And I think all those things we've just talked about, we've had to do a lot in the organisation to build our capability to deliver on those things. So training, guidance, improving our data to understand where those locations are. So as well as delivery, we've had to really upskill ourselves, and that comes from learning and working with others, so Network Rails, Samaritans, academics, to really understand what that evidence-based approach should be and how we apply it to the roads.
Yeah. A lot of the things Nikki talked about there, Kate, is to do with design, how we design and build our transport infrastructure. Same for Louise. There will be times when that requires departures from standards, and that might have cost implications, might have aesthetic implications. How do we manage that and make sure suicide prevention is included from the design stage?
So yeah, there are two main areas. One is the actual structural design. Where we have high-risk locations, we can use higher parapets that are more difficult to climb. There is nothing that's not climbable, but we can reduce the likelihood substantially. The difficulty is there is no standard type approved parapet of that sort. So every high containment parapet is a bespoke one-off. Lots of complex design decisions. The loading on the parapets themselves is incredibly complex with the nature of high-risk locations. They're often iconic high locations. They're often wind susceptible. So you have a problem of designing the actual parapet or from a structural perspective, and it's outside standards, so we're all sort of in a unknown area. And then separate from that is a sort of 3D form aspect of how do you create the physical form that makes it not just climbable in a cross-section context, but in a 3D form. Can somebody go to the end of the parapet, climb around the outside, climb along the outside? If they now decide they don't want to act and they want to get back, they can't get back and they fall off from that location. So making sure we're not actually making something worse rather than better. And they're very tricky 3D forms. Other features we use, for example, we might have a feeder pillar on a bridge supplying lamp columns on a bridge, and that feeder pillar might be a climb point to climb over. So considering every element of the infrastructure is really important, and weighing up all of those things. The departures process is quite burdensome, it's costly, it's time consuming. There might be an incentive to use something as standard. Actually, in this context, the bigger problem is there are no standards.
And then, Beth, it would be easy to assume that you've done all this great work in the infrastructure, but someone can just go somewhere else and attempt their life somewhere else, to take their life somewhere else. But that's not necessarily the case, is it? So, yeah, what happens when we've managed to prevent a suicide attempt?
Yeah, so certainly it's not the case that people will automatically kind of go somewhere else. Suicide is not inevitable. It is preventable, and it's really important to kind of build that understanding and awareness. As has been mentioned, we know that restricting access to means is a really important and effective means of preventing suicide. There is research that says kind of it stops essentially 85% of deaths, which is a huge amount. And I think, you know, when people go from thinking about ending their life to the act of ending their life, you know, making that harder by restricting access to means is really important. We do know that the kind of restriction of access to means in one location doesn't automatically lead to a kind of compensating rise in other locations. This is something we might refer to as displacement, you know, where essentially we do something at location A and the concern is that people will then go and present at location B, C, D. Public Health Scotland actually did a rapid literature review last year, the year before, and they found out that essentially displacement is really unlikely to happen. Where it does happen, it tends to be for a really short period of time. So the recommendation is to kind of monitor any surrounding areas, particularly when there is media and kind of press information around that. So if we know that an intervention has been put in place at location A or kind of highlights the means or methods, particularly looking at that. I think what I would also like to mention is that we do know that people in crisis may have very personal or specific reasons that they attend a particular location with intention of suicide or self-harm. That might be because of their reputation, again through media. It might be through kind of cultural significance. It might be through the fact that it is personally meaningful, close by. You know, it's a myriad of reasons. Sometimes suicidal behaviour will be planned out. Sometimes it will be really impulsive. But in either case, making it more difficult for a person to kind of go through with their suicidal thoughts, you know, A, enables more time for, you know, teams like Network Rail to be able to intervene with that person in crisis, but also gives the person in crisis more time to kind of think about what's going on, potentially, hopefully, see things like our help-seeking signage, reach out for support, etc. And I mean, fundamentally, we've heard from both National Highways and Network Rail, like the work that they're doing. We have so many stories of people who have engaged with the person, interrupted their suicidal thoughts, and have saved lives. So that point around, it's absolutely not inevitable, I think.
Yeah, and if we do all the work with the infrastructure to help in preventing people choosing to take their life in that way, what do we need to do with our people to give them the confidence? We talked about having the confidence to intervene. What sort of training can be?
I think there's two aspects to it. There's, in a preparedness and awareness context, designers and network managers being aware the scale of this issue and the fact that there are things they can do, sometimes everyday issues, like, you know, on a conventional structure, things like the feeder pillar, identifying features that might increase risk, identify opportunities to reduce risk. So being aware of things that they can do, being aware something might occur, and then helping people to prepare how would they intervene, having the courage to intervene, employers encouraging staff to choose to intervene if they feel able to, but not demanding they do so. A lot of this agency is really important. And then after the event, understanding there can be a long-term impact, sometimes not immediately, it can be quite a long time after the event. Sometimes people are kind of in shock and dealing with the immediate incident, and then they have issues longer down the line. So most employers have some form of employee assistance scheme, and it's making sure people have that information when they need it. I always say to people, it needs to be in your phone and on the pinboard at home. You need to not have to log into your laptop and go in, trying to remember where, get into the VPN and then trying to remember where to find it on the company website. And most of these things support families as well.
Yeah.
So if you've seen somebody take their life at work, your family might be worried about you. So employee assistance schemes can often help those people as well.
Yeah. Now, we're here at Interchange, and Interchange is about cross-communication between the modes. I come to you first, Nikki. What do you feel National Highways has learned from working with Samaritans and with Network Rail on suicide prevention?
I think, firstly, that it's not just a health service issue, that different sectors, and particularly transport, when we talked about the public place event and what we experience both as operators and designers of the network, that suicides do happen. So we do have a role. Certainly with Network Rail, again, it's very people-centric. People are really important. They're the eyes, the ears, they're the interaction. So the layers of empowering your employees to either intervene or not intervene. If that's not right, that's okay too. Empowering the bystander, and then thinking also what we probably haven't got there yet, but definitely that upstream work and working with different people to sort of support people before they even get to crisis point. What Network Rail have done really well and certainly helped us is sharing that knowledge and insight and experiences, good and bad. So what's worked, what isn't working, or what's less effective. So that's helped us, get much more up to speed. And when we talk about that capability, definitely working with others is crucial to that, and learning from different people's, the way they operate. I think where we're moving to, and we hope to share some of our experience, and now that we've probably been looking into suicide prevention for about 8 years, is that we can't just keep reacting to the same locations, that we have to be more proactive in the way, some of the things Kate's brought up around, like good design, what does good design look like, and how we build in that much more earlier into our kind of design processes.
It's a safe system in action, isn't it?
Yeah,
Including suicide is part of the safe system. And Louise, by the same token, what do you feel you might have learned from National Highways, and what could they learn from you?
Yeah, so I am in the process of stealing with pride and permission. National Highways have created a risk model for suicide prevention or suicide risk management, which I see as a means of taking us out of that reactive approach. So for us at the moment, an incident happens, we respond, but we need to put ourselves on a much more sort of forward-thinking footing. So taking account of what's happening on a station around a level crossing or around a bridge, what the characteristics of that sort of immediate location are, what the characteristics of the surrounding community is. So are there high levels of deprivation? What's the population density? All of those societal risks that are imported. And then when you add that together with the incident history, the full incident history, and feed that all into a system, which is what highways have done, National Highways have done. So we are basically trying to create something very similar, and I think that will put us on a much more proactive footing going forwards. And in terms of highways learning from us, I think not so much learning, I think it's just the opportunities for collaboration. So I think we're really starting to explore that now, and our local teams are talking to each other much more than they used to. But I think where we've got high-risk locations that are common to us both, there's probably lots more that we can be doing to respond to those locations together to manage the risk there.
Sounds like an integrated national transport strategy, almost, dare I say it. And Beth, sort of taking the national perspective, what's the biggest challenge for Samaritans, and what does that mean for the transport sector?
Yeah, so Samaritans take a call for help roughly every 10 seconds. So over the course of a year, it's roughly 3.3 million calls a year. We can't do it alone. I think this point around interconnectedness is the really important part. Like, Samaritans are a piece of the suicide prevention landscape. I'd say quite an important piece, but I'm biased. So, but we can't do it alone. Getting everybody to recognise that suicide prevention is everybody's role and responsibility, everybody has a part in this, is really important. And I think there is something about ensuring that we have access to the best available evidence about who's at risk and why. It's about ensuring that we have the kind of data and evidence to help us to target our interventions to those specific locations that, you guys have already discussed and articulated. I think we have to take that multi-agency approach. As you've mentioned, Nikki, it's not just a mental health services role. It needs to sit across a wider area. People can get to the point of feeling suicidal for a variety of reasons, and so therefore we have to look differently at how we might go about preventing it. But we do also need to be quite careful about how we do that. So, we want to raise awareness that suicide is preventable. We want to encourage help seeking, but we don't want to raise awareness on the means and the methods and the locations. So that was something that you were talking about in terms of that responsible communications and things. We don't want to highlight that there are ways to take your life on the road and rail network. We don't want specific locations being highlighted as a good location to take your life, because that's not right. And I think we can all contribute to this, breaking the stigma around suicide, being able to talk about suicide, doing it responsibly, challenging those myths, challenging the perceptions and taking practical action that we can take. And whether that's as an individual, you can talk about it to your friends and family and loved ones, whether you go and talk to your manager, whether you as an industry go about and agree this kind of integrated approach. I think fundamentally we as a collective have the real chance to make a kind of real difference there.
And what would you say success look like? If we're at Interchange 2035, looking back, what would success look like?
So I think that the transport sector has a really important role in preventing suicides. As the owner of so much infrastructure that could be used as a means for suicide, you will always have and you will continue to have that critical role. So the new Labour government have kind of kept on the national suicide prevention strategy that was developed by the last Conservative government. And they have also committed to reducing suicide rates as one of their key health missions. The role of National Highways and Network Rail is kind of recognised in that strategy, though I think probably underplays the work that you guys are respectively doing, to be honest with you. I think there is something about the transport industry committing to similar themes that are in the national strategy, namely that, a reduction every year and looking towards lowest ever rates, which is what the national strategy does. I think it is as important, though, to look at success not just in terms of reducing deaths, but also reducing the number of presentations and attempts. So looking at that wider piece, and I do recognise that data is really difficult to always get our hands on. But we want fewer people to try and attempt to take their own lives on the respective networks. We want people to feel more confident to intervene, so the training that you're doing, but also the campaigns for the public that you guys are doing. And again, it's about bringing all parts of the industry together in this, I think. So it's not only influencing your own workforces, but also your designers, your engineers, your contractors who have their own teams themselves to be able to do it. And I think it's not about you always having to do the influencing yourself, but kind of leading and galvanizing, for want of a better word, for the industry. I think there is something really important, we've touched on it, about kind of extending the evidence base so we know what works. It informs both your position but industry best practice and sharing that around the industry. So, yeah, I think essentially there's a raft of measures unhelpfully in a way, that shows progress against a really ambitious target. Yeah, I think it's quite
I think that's great. And the point about measuring presentations, it's really hard to measure it if you're not looking.
Yeah.
So you've got to know to look and start to capture some of that data.
Absolutely.
I can't believe where we are time-wise. It's absolutely flown by, but we do have time for one last question. So maybe coming down the line from Kate first, one final kind of takeaway message for the audience.
I think the key would be on local roads as well as strategic roads, because the big action's been done by National Highways and Network Rail, but actually the local authority structures that are relevant. Every design, a network management and operational decision affects every other aspect of the network. It's not helpful to create a high containment parapet to prevent suicide that suffers fatigue-induced failure and falls onto a motorway and harms lots of people. We're looking for simplistic four legs good, two leg bag solutions, and there aren't any.
Yep.
Every decision must be evaluated for effect on workers and road users of all categories, and on people at risk of suicide, and on other communities, the people who are underneath a structure where somebody may attempt to take their life, for example. Making sure we're considering that in the round, that's the key for me.
Very good. Nikki?
So for me, we've used this phrase a couple of times now, but that suicide is not inevitable. And I think even at crisis point, even at that very last moment where somebody's taking action, that we in the transport sector can make a difference and can save a life. And that's been we've had some really good conversations within our company about how we can influence that and what we need to do. And we don't have all the answers. And I would just stress that we all just start to think about that and think about how we can play that within our individual roles as designers, operators. So yeah, just...
Yeah, everyone can make a difference.
Yeah.
Beth?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo this very much. Suicide is preventable, that it is everybody's responsibility. And I think, everyone in this audience, you can play your part, whether that is going and talking to your friends, family, your manager, really pushing for change. And I would really recommend or ask you to think about what the role you guys can play in suicide prevention going forward.
Louise?
So I would say if you are somebody that is responsible for or plays a role in suicide prevention, collaboration is everything. No one agency or organisation can do it on their own. If you're an employer, then there is real value actually, in looking after your workforce. And there's a piece of research recently undertaken by Deloitte last year that highlighted that for every £1 spent on your workforce's mental health and well-being, you get £4.70 back in productivity. But for everybody in the room, when you leave this room and go home, leave this conference and go home tonight, just check in on the people that you care about and just make sure that they're okay.
Amazing. Well, it's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much. And although it's the end of the session, I hope it's not the end of many more conversations about this topic. We've heard, although suicide is an increasing challenge, it's not inevitable. There are policies, strategies, and interventions that can be applied. And it takes recognition of the issue. Today's discussion is part of that journey. It takes curiosity, it takes consideration, it takes coordination. But I hope you can see that the possibility of positive action is there, and that we've helped to encourage you to take such action in future. We appreciate we've been covering challenging material, so again, if you need to contact Samaritans 116 123 or the employee assistance programs, do feel free to do so. And we're not taking the Q&A now, but if you want to catch us at the end of the session or onto the National Highway stand thereafter, we'd love to carry on the discussion. So we'd like to thank you for attending, and I'm sure you'd like to thank this fantastic panel for their insights. Thank you very much.